Okay, so welcome everyone. Thank you, Tracy, for inviting myself, Andy Taylor, and Donal Collins to the first Healthy Bite Summit for 2022. I am a former professional footballer that is now a strength and conditioning coach and a low-carb lifestyle coach. I found myself into this space wanting to feel optimally about my health, because when I finished playing, that was not something that I was feeling, and wanted to understand why that was the case. So I started to research, and along my journey found out about the importance of insulin resistance to my health. And being able to measure that became more apparent to me, and then for the people that I was working with. And that's how I came to meet Donal, and now I work with metabolic. So I will introduce Donal now to give him a chance to give a little background on his journey also.
Hi, so I'm Donal Collins. I'm now a retired GP, worked in the NHS for 27 years, and now working full-time with my own company called Collins to improve insulin resistance. But in my time in the NHS, I treated people with type 2 diabetes in the standard way, which is you pick them up as early as you can, you give them drugs, and you follow them as they slowly deteriorate over time, keeping on adding medications to them, which, frankly, I found a disappointing, unrewarding mechanism of dealing with type 2 diabetes. But during this time, I myself developed type 2 diabetes, so it became very personal. And then a few patients taught me about how they reversed their own diabetes, which I found amazing. And then I looked up the papers, and there's loads of research, as we know, about this. So I tried it on myself and rapidly reversed my diabetes, and I was blown away by the effects in a normal, real food, whole food way it was. So I then tried it on multiples of my patients, again with dramatic results. So that's when I decided to try and do things at scale. And as we know, insulin is a key hormone in all this. So when insulin levels get too high and you get insulin resistance, that's when things go wrong. So when Andy and I found out we could measure insulin through a finger prick test, it was a no-brainer. We had to have this bit of technology to help us understand our clients' journeys a bit better.
Excellent. So just to give a little overview of what we're going to cover today. So we're going to have a look at what insulin actually is, and insulin resistance, and how we may measure it, and how that's had a big impact on the patient's journey when they're able to view this measurement. So Donal, we'll start with, so what is insulin, and what is it used for in the body?
So insulin is a hormone, and hormones are chemical structures that travel around the body to basically give instructions. So insulin is made in your pancreas. It increases in response to foods, particularly sugary foods or carbohydrates that are rapidly absorbed. You will get a very quick spike in your insulin to say this stuff needs to be packed away for storage somewhere, usually in the liver, in the muscles. And when those places are full, the glycogen stores, then it gets pushed into cells. And of course, the amazing thing with fat cells is they have an unlimited ability to grow. So sadly, what happens is we just keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So I say sadly, but also it's a mechanism that the liver has devised to protect itself, because if you didn't keep growing at an infinite rate, this would be packed into your liver even more tightly, and that would rapidly cause cirrhosis of your liver. So obesity, strangely, is the liver's way of protecting itself from the awful damage that rapidly absorbing sugars do.
Right. Okay. So so what is insulin resistance then?
So insulin resistance is essentially when insulin has been too high for too long, your body tends to ignore the messaging from it. So I remember when I heard about this initially, I found it hard to understand. But if you think about other things that happen to the body, so alcohol is a good example, or opiates, or even antibiotics, if you take these things too often, too frequently, well, you get antibiotic resistance, you get opioid resistance, and you need bigger doses to have the same effect. Similarly with alcohol, you know, to get the same effect of inebriation, you need bigger and bigger doses as time goes by. So essentially the same happens with insulin. If it's chronically raised for too long, the body doesn't like it, and then it resists the effects of it. So of course, what happens then is the pancreas says, well, we've got all this sugar coming in, we need to pack it away somewhere. So it chucks out even more insulin to overcome the resistance. And then you get into this ever spiraling circle of rising insulin levels.
Sure. And so that can be very individual then. So from a fat storage capacity point of view, is that why we can maybe see some people that are very overweight but not necessarily insulin resistant, but also someone that's not necessarily overweight and can be insulin resistant as well?
So it is very individual, and you know, in the obese population, about 20% are insulin sensitive. Okay, and about 80% will be insulin resistant. But equally, there's quite a few thin people who are insulin resistant, and the classic example would be Southeast Asia, where people get diabetes much earlier. So I think each of us have an individual carbohydrate threshold, right? So that once our carbohydrate thresholds are full, it then spills over into the fat reserves. Okay.
So so what's the important thing to know about insulin for your health then?
So what you really want to know is, how high is my insulin going to try and help control a standard dose of sugar to keep everything in balance, or homeostasis, as the scientists like to say.
Yeah.
And so in the measurements that we use, typically, if insulin stays under 30, you know, you're kind of okay. But if it flies above 30, then you know you need a lot more insulin to try and control the sugars more than anyone else. And then the higher the insulin goes, it has an effect on so many other things. So one is it makes things grow, so it'll make your fat cells grow and get bigger. It makes other things grow. So a really easy physical sign to think, have I got insulin resistance, is skin tags. So people get skin tags in their armpits or on their neck. And if you've got a lot of those, you almost definitely are insulin resistant.
Right.
You can get abnormal colored skin on the neck as well. And of course, you know, things that grow and keep on growing and then eventually grow out of control are called cancers. And so insulin resistance has a strong association with a lot of abdominal, particularly bowel cancers as well. And so that's why it's key to keep it down. It has so many other effects as well. It affects another hormone in the kidney called aldosterone, which makes you retain sodium and fluid, and that drives your blood pressure up. And insulin resistance in the brain causes problems in the brain box, and it stops your brain working very well, which causes you to lose a bit of memory and eventually Alzheimer's. So would you like to know about this, 5 or 6 years before these things start really happening to you? Or do you want to wait until your blood sugars get out of control and you have a diagnosis of diabetes, or you start your journey of forgetting things? And I think prevention, as we know, is the best method of controlling these things. So the earlier you know, the earlier you can do something about it.
Sure. Okay, so just before we get into the measurements, so what is the kind of state of play in the world at the moment in regards to insulin resistance? How prevalent is it?
So this is where it gets really scary, I think. So there was a paper about 4 years ago where they did a survey on the adults in North America, and the outcome of that was that only 12% of people were healthy. So 88% had one of the arms of metabolic syndrome, meaning they were insulin resistant.
Wow, that is shocking.
Now, we're usually not too far behind America, so we're probably not as bad. So my guess, because the work hasn't been done here in the UK, is we're probably around the
80% mark. Wow.
Yes. And I think we can see that. So when you walk on the high street, just look around you as you walk around.
Yeah, absolutely. Very true. And so why is insulin resistant not known about more widely? Is it down to the measurements at the moment? And what are the barriers to measurements?
So I think it is something that's well known, but nobody really knows how to pick it up early. I think we have late measures. So we know if our HbA1c, a marker of long-term blood sugar control, goes up.
Sure.
That definitely means you have had resistance, but that's late measure. If your lipids are abnormal, particularly a triglyceride HDL ratio going high, that's a marker that things are going askew. But the big problem with measuring insulin up until now has been you needed to go to a phlebotomist. So that's somebody who sticks a needle into your vein, takes a sample of blood. And then to measure insulin levels in response to a sugar load, you need somebody to do this at time 0, 40 minutes, 60 minutes, 90 minutes, 120. And the health service is not set up to do that. So if you did that in a normal phlebotomy clinic, it would be a nightmare in terms of logistics, trying to deal with everyone else. And this person who's shouting, saying, 90 minutes, I need my blood doing now. Yeah. Whereas having a point of care test means finger prick, take a drop of blood, and then you can put it into a machine at the same place where you are, so the blood does not need to be sent off to a laboratory. You get an instant reading. It's as Ben Bickman said, it's the holy grail. It really opens up the doors to understanding what's going on and allows you to personalize your nutrition prescription for the person in front of you. Sure.
Okay, so if measurement, and as we know through metabolic, this point of care testing is made easier. So what do we look? What is it that's looked for through that test? So you kind of alluded to the time points that we look at for a Kraft test. So what would we look at on a graph, and do you have something to refer to for this graph to see, so the viewers can see what that looks like?
So I'm going to share a screen with you. Let me know if this comes up. I'll just quickly go through some of this. So just these were some of the headings that I came up with, which is KISS, which stands for Keep It Simple, Stupid, because within the health service, we really make things more complicated than they should be. All right. And if somebody can't explain something to you in a simple manner, it probably means they themselves don't understand it.
Yeah.
Occam's razor, I think, is a really good sort of concept that, again, we tend to avoid in the health service, which is, if you have a problem that has 4 or 5 solutions opposite it, the simplest one invariably is the best one. And somehow we always go for the more complicated because it makes us look clever. And then to help with this sort of discussion, it's also about, if we knew type 2 diabetes and metabolic health was reversible, would we set the services up as they are now? And I hope the answer will be no.
Yeah, very
because what we designed, because what we do now is we tend to catch people early, put them on multiple medications, and then, as I did for 20 years of my career, just watch them getting worse and worse and worse, and chucking more and more pills at them. And this is just some simple graphics around what insulin does. But it's also to say insulin is so much more than just a blood sugar hormone.
Yeah.
Okay, so it interacts with your liver, fat cells, skeletal muscle. It has massive effects all throughout the body, which is why it's really key to keep it in balance. This is a list of what insulin does. And again, when I wrote this list out, it staggered me at how many things. Now, I'm not going to go through everything, but here's 4 common things that all of us would recognize. But then here's a few more, a bit more interesting. And here's some more. So we're now into 12 things it does. And then we've got 19 things it does. And number 19 is interesting, isn't it? Because that's where, you've got your own natural insulin and you've got the injected insulin.
Yes.
So if you overdose on injected insulin, you can create insulin resistance. So in type 1 diabetics, that's called double diabetes.
Of course.
Right. And here we go. Another 31 effects that it has, and it has a huge impact in inflammatory conditions. So when we treat people with the right food, it's amazing how many people with chronic pain get better. And I think we've touched on these things before about what insulin resistance is. Solution is stop anything that stimulates your insulin.
Sure.
And here's a graphic from one of our friends, David Unwin, about the hidden sugars in our system. So, healthy basmati rice is the equivalent of 10 spoons of sugar that you're taking. And these sort of graphics are really powerful and helpful for people to look through, and then they'll understand, this is not my fault.
Yeah,
I've been doing what you guys have told me.
Yeah.
And here, so this is the interesting bit. So this is the bit we wanted to get to about measurements. What are the various things you can measure? So the items we're looking at here in front of us here is a machine that can measure HbA1c, a lipidometer, and the machine called Bacchus is the one that can measure insulin using the lateral flows that we've now come to know and love over the last 2 years, putting a little droplet of blood where the blue circle is, and 4 drops of a buffer. And then after a 15-minute wait, you get your number. You can see insulin 49.4 on the machine. This then links to through the internet to a graphing software. And here's the output.
Excellent.
So what we can see here is the dotted line is the glucose rising. And then in response to that, you get the solid line increasing, which is your insulin response, entirely appropriately. But in this particular individual, you can see that the insulin goes up to nearly 182 or so, a really crazy high number, to try and control the sugar spike.
So what does the patient start to ask you then when they start to see this progress in front of them when you're doing the assessment? Because you've got time in between the time points of doing the assessment. So what conversations start to come out when they start to see this?
What's interesting at the beginning is, the fasting insulin was a little bit raised. So we say, oh, that's a bit higher than we would normally see. And, they'll say, gosh, well, I haven't eaten since last night, 12 hours ago.
Sure.
So it's interesting that it's a little bit raised in the morning. And of course, we can talk about dawn phenomenons and why insulin might rise in the morning. But nonetheless, if you're very insulin sensitive, quite often it's so low we can't measure it.
Yeah.
And then, you drink the sugar at about 850 just after the first 2 dots fasting levels.
Yeah.
And then you see it goes up to 52, 53 here, the second reading.
Yeah.
And you think, okay, that's now gone into the red zone. So we now know we've got a higher insulin reading than we should have.
Sure.
And then, the question is from the patient invariably is, what happens if the next one's even higher? And it's both good and bad news. So the bad news is if it goes higher, like it has done here, you're fantastically insulin resistant.
Yeah.
The great news is we can do something wonderful about this.
Yeah. So that's going to be my next thing. So can we reverse insulin resistance?
Absolutely is the answer.
Yeah.
So, and again, it's a bit like, can you reverse the effects of chronic alcohol intake? If you stop the alcohol, you improve things. If you stop the opioids, you improve things.
Yeah.
If you stop the sugars, you improve insulin resistance.
Yeah.
Now, it can take some time for these measurements to change, but physiologically, people will feel the effects really quickly.
Yeah.
But probably if you wanted to see an improvement in this graph, you probably going to wait 3 to 6 months to seeing a measurable improvement in the figure prick.
Yeah, of course. And what?
But certainly
in terms of kind of motivation, then for the patient to come back and be able to reassess it when they've put that intervention in place, that must be really powerful.
It's huge because now this lady, every time she looks at a plate of food, she knows exactly what her insulin response is going to be.
Sure.
So now she's making an informed choice every time she eats. So be it a right choice or a wrong choice from our point of view, at least now she knows what she's doing.
Yeah.
Where previously she thought she was doing the right thing, but actually causing quite a lot of harm.
Yeah.
So she, after this carve, she's left fully empowered, not just having had a lecture from me, but seeing what her body has done to a relatively small 75 grams of glucose.
Yeah.
And I've met her a number of times since then, and she's now going around with a smile on her face, not just because she's better, but she's empowered. She knows exactly what's going on.
Yeah.
She knows the solution, and she's gripped it with both hands. And she's now sleeping better. She's got great energy, and that happened within the first week.
Sure.
So real food is more powerful than any drug I have come across in my whole career.
Mm. And we saw the David Unwin slide, and when people start to have that kind of information about the impact that those foods can have from a sugar or food turning into sugar impact on the body, then that is the type of information that gives them that power to be able to make that informed choice of what's on their plate.
Absolutely. And I think it's understanding that some of the foods that would have traditionally been portrayed as healthy foods, if you're metabolically broken, simply are not healthy foods at all.
Absolutely.
Now, when you've reversed your long-term conditions, there is an argument about maybe 1 or 2 days a week introducing some of these foods back, so you get a thing called metabolic flexibility.
Sure.
But on the road to recovery, I would say get rid of them, fix your insulin resistance, and then we can talk about what else to do in the future.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, having that measure to be able to, one, see it, understand it, and then be able to track it on that journey to make sure that you know the changes that you are making and taking in the right direction are hugely beneficial.
And I think we can also personalize it. So you might get somebody coming along who has been insulin resistant for some time, and they've started a low carb journey. So they might have reduced the amount of carbohydrates they're eating. So they might have gone from 400 or 500 grams per day down to about 200 grams per day.
Yeah.
But still not low enough.
Yeah.
And then if they got one of these curves back, that would empower them to go lower,
Yeah.
under 100, or even ketogenic, which would be under 30 grams.
Sure.
Um,
Yeah, it allows
so
people to kind of understand where their level is and what they can deal with. Yeah.
exactly.
Sure.
How hard to turn the screw. So, and you know, so this has revolutionized the way I talk to people. So for these curves, we do a 4-hour consultation. And usually at the end of the 4 hours, they don't need to come back to me. They're fully empowered. They can go away and take control of their lives.
Yeah.
Now, thankfully, from my business point of view, they'd like to come back to me.
Yeah.
Accountability and remeasurements. But we like to make sure that they have everything they need in their hands to take care of their own health.
Yeah. And be empowered. Yeah. Yeah. Fantastic. So I think as a bonus, on top of this video, we will show an intro to measuring insulin, how you do the point of care testing. So that will be available for the viewers to be able to access as well. So people get to see how accessible that is, and to hopefully get to the point where we democratize healthcare, which is something that I know you're very keen on, Donal.
Absolutely. I think, you know, I hate paternalistic medicine. It was something I grew up with, and I've always tried to resist it. And, you know, giving each individual the powers to take control of their health and make decisions has to be the way forward. And I think indeed it's for the people out there, you know, this technology is available. You can get it. You can measure your patient's insulin levels and change the way that you jointly come up with a plan to improve their health going forward.
Excellent. Well, Donal, thank you very much for your time. We hope this has been really informative for everyone to learn a little bit more about insulin resistance, how we can now measure it well, and be informed on all our own journey to optimal health.